Um, Welcome, everyone, to episode 2 of the isys3300 drop-in discussion session. Last week's one, you'll find it in the week 6 folder, I think, the recording of it under coronavirus corner. And I think probably that's where this one will end up, in the week 7 learning materials folder as well, when it eventually does get up there. And my name is Dr. John Lenarchik, and I'm in conversation with Ilya Ananiev.
Yes, hello,
Ilya.
greetings.
Greetings and salutations. And it's kind of a sad day today, because I don't know if people are aware of what happened yesterday evening. Four Victoria police officers lost their lives in the service of their duty. So there was much comment made about that, and we've been talking about duty a lot in this course. Like in weeks 2 and 3, when we're talking about the notion of Kantian ethics, and how there's this thing called deontology, which is all about duty. So what is my duty? That is what you should follow, and it's not about consequences, that kind of thing. So, and these police officers that lost their lives, they were following their duty and taking risks in the line of their duty, and they pay the ultimate price for that. And I think that's kind of part of the theme of this discussion, today. As you see, what I'm sharing with everyone here is well, this week's kind of focus article, but as is usually the case with drop-in discussion sessions, we may digress, off into other topics, etc. But I'd always like to have something that we focus on, So when this ends up on Canvas, you'll see the file for this discussion session captured, right? And you'll also see the link to this article, which is from the Markula Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University in the USA. And I think we looked at another article last week, and I think the Markula Center for Applied Ethics is good in that way, because I think they've got a separate kind of section on their site where they look at ethical issues of the coronavirus crisis. And I kind of picked this article before, what happened last night with the 4 Victoria police officers. And this was kind of about the ethics of risk. And I thought it was kind of interesting. Pandemics and the ethics of risk. How much risk tolerance is the right amount? And I guess risk tolerance would be, how much, should you actually risk in what you do in life? And I think if we just scan through this article, this is by Brian Patrick Green, Director of Technology Ethics at the Markula Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University. And it's quite a recent article. It was published last week. It seems like every day that goes by, nature is cooking up another disaster, but it's nothing personal. It's merely the side effects of nature's constant processes of geology, weather, and biological change. All humanity can hope to do is to be prepared when these disasters appear. And how prepared we are for those disasters indicates what risk standard we're taking relative to them. It also raises the question, which risk standard is most ethical for a pandemic? Because I think the pandemic, it is not something that often occurs. And I think that's the problem that we have now, is the kind of the uncertainty, of the situation that we're in. And that is kind of scary and frustrating and agitating for people. I don't know, Ilya, are you kind of agitated or irritated by the current state, stage 3 lockdown?
In a way, it's affected me in a different way. In a way, I actually like it. I don't have to travel. I can just, basically offices at home. I don't. The travel part is I've cut out four hours of travel every time I have to go to RMIT. So in that respect, yes. But in another respect is that technology really isn't ready for what actually happened. Bandwidth and so forth, like we were discussing before, we have issues there. And now everyone that is working at home is now starting to be put in a spot where they have to be IT specialists as well. Licensing issues pop up now. All those sort of little niggly service update packs and so forth. They have to actually, do them rather than postponing them. Not one device is running now. You have, like in this house here, I think we've got like 20 different devices all running at the same time. If I actually calculate it, I've actually got about 70 or so devices around my place. That includes routers, servers, cameras, mobiles, laptops, PDAs, tablets. It's phenomenal, and I didn't, you don't realise these sort of things until something like this happens.
You're just showing off, because all I've got is, 2 tin cans and a piece of string at the moment, and I'm doing all this stuff.
Literally, even here, right on my desk here, I've got 2 widescreens, which basically fill like 1.5 meters of screen. And now I've got another screen at the back here, which is like a 24-inch widescreen. It's from one of my servers. I have 1, 2, 3 servers on my left, and I've got 1, 2 servers on my right, and my PC, the desktop, is here under the desk. And then on the desk, I've got a router. I've got the router, which is my ADSL out. I've got an internal modem, or not modem, sorry, internal router for my network, which connects all the devices in on this particular segment. And then I've got a switch which connects to all my cameras and so forth as well. So, and you don't realise the impact of what you've got around you until you sit here for like 8 hours a day. Listening to like hum of power supplies and so forth.
See, that's why you needed an engineering degree, because you ended up having. But there are poor people out there that haven't finished high school and have to deal with everything in their lives from I don't know, just a cruddy little phone that they have in their hands, right? And that is the way they connect to the internet, because what I put up in this week's week 7 folder, because the theme this week is kind of in 2 parts, and that's why if you look at the audio seminar that I uploaded last night, it's in 2 parts. So one part is the digital divide, and the second part is the evolution and the future of work. So the digital divide is basically this term given the fact that there are people that have access to wonderful technology that makes life fantastic, and you've just described. You obviously are not part of the information have-nots. You have too much. So you have ICT obesity, I think. So it's more like, whereas other people kind of struggle to actually get a Wi-Fi connection, for example, wherever they are. And one of the articles that I put up, which was published in The Guardian, I think yesterday or the day before, is some people are saying that public libraries in Victoria should be classed as essential services, under stage 3 lockdown, and that would mean that they'd have to be opened up with a skeleton staff. Right? And the argument is that public libraries aren't just about books, or probably they're not about books at all nowadays, but they are a place where people go to and access free internet, And this article was talking to a whole bunch of people. It was saying that now that all public libraries are actually shut, they're like disadvantaged. Like one person was, I think, a professional person out of work, etc. And she was using the public library in her suburb, right, to actually connect to the internet to, put in job applications and stuff like that, because she doesn't have internet at home because she's out of work, etc. And that's the reason why she can't connect. And there was a whole bunch of other people in the same boat, you know. And I know as well because when libraries were open, I would often go to public libraries, just wander in, etc. And you'd see all the kind of terminals, right? And people would be accessing the internet and stuff like that, or they'd be using the free Wi-Fi, and now you can't, right? So
Yeah.
the other thing is this person that said that she was using the public library to make job applications and stuff like that on the internet. She said the fallback would be go to the local McDonald's and use the Wi-Fi there. But if you go to McDonald's and Starbucks, etc., you cannot sit down anymore. Those places are just takeaway only. So in effect, all the places where people would go to get free Wi-Fi, you can't actually be there for long periods of time. You know, so even if you were to go to Flinders Street Railway Station, for example, there's free Wi-Fi there. You can't just sit down on the ground, you know, next to a PowerPoint and actually, you know, surf the net anymore.
Yeah.
And in the past, I would see people do that, you know, even at Flinders Street Station. So people would be just in the corner somewhere. They'd find a PowerPoint, they'd be recharging their phone, and also using the internet, you know. And I think that's the issue now, you know, because people would assume, right, that everybody's got access to, you know, technology, the internet, and that's not the case. I think even in, you know, a wonderful Melbourne or suburbs. But you've got a different kind of digital divide, Ilya. See, you may have lots of equipment, as you described, so much equipment, right, that you're almost hoarding technology. You're a technology hoarder, you know. But I really admire that because the thing is, like nowadays, right, where can you go and shop, right? So the only things that are open, like Officeworks and JB Hi-Fi and Harvey Norman. So the thing is, right, unless you want to hoard, you know, furniture like sofas and stuff like that. But if you're a tech person, then you think, oh, what can I buy that I don't have? Can I buy another, you know, a power board? Can I buy another handheld device, etc. That kind of thing, you know. So the kind of tech nerds amongst us, you know, if they can afford to, can probably dream of doing something like that. But like in your case, I guess your digital divide is you don't have good quality internet connectivity. Am I correct?
No, and it's exactly right. I was about to say because, like you know, for the last 4 or 5 days we were capped here, so we got throttled on because we have a limit. We're not on NBN Unlimited and so forth. So it really hit home how much we rely on the internet. For instance, the only thing that I could really do is like text emails. I streaming video or anything like that, forget it. And for 4 days to have homeschooling where everything is videos, all I was really trying to do is try and speed up my network. So almost to a point thinking, you know, map out my whole network and start looking at how do I increase the throughput through here to get new routers which are all gigabit and so forth, right? So it was a big impact, right? So there are negatives, there are positives, but I suppose if you go back to your course, it's like, or to the course, it's like being stoic, right? Stoicism.
Stoicism. It's good that you bring up one of the kind of ethical frameworks from weeks 2 and 3. And Stoicism is that framework I think I described it as shit happens, basically. Right? That's how I like to describe Stoicism, because it's more like, well, people would say, oh no, we have this thing called coronavirus, we're doomed, etc. It's the apocalypse, etc. And it's more like, yeah, but we had the bushfires before that, and we had something else before that, you know. So there's always kind of some kind of disaster coming along. You know? So Stoicism is more like an ethical framework that takes advantage of pessimism within the human species, you know. So I like to say that there are some people that are glass half full individuals, and other people are glass half empty, you know. Let me guess, Ilya, you're a glass half full.
Full, of course.
Yes, exactly. You're a natural born, optimist. Because you're originally from the Czech Republic, I think.
Yeah, it used to be Czechoslovakia, and then the country got split. So I'm actually from the Slovak side, and
Ah,
yeah, and Dad was Bulgarian, and because Dad was Bulgarian, no matter where I was born on the planet, I was called Bulgarian by Dad, but I was actually born in Bratislava,
Bratislava. Oh, okay.
Czechoslovakia. Yeah, so I'm really a Slovak.
Ah, Slovak. See, the reason why I bring that up is I was looking at my news feed today, the BBC news feed, and it said that Germany has announced that the wearing of face masks is compulsory through all German states. And then they had a description of other places in Europe where the wearing of face masks is compulsory. And guess where? Czech Republic and Slovakia.
Yeah.
The Czech Republic and Slovakia, the wearing of face masks is compulsory. And I think it was Slovakia, is it the Prime Minister or the President said that because they're wearing face masks, the infection rate has gone down. But the medicos are saying there's no real scientific evidence to support that. But I found that kind of interesting. That I think the wearing of face masks, right, is a kind of a sign of a risk aversion, I think, or it's like a risk aversion, a ritual. Because this article was saying that the World Health Organization is still saying don't wear a face mask unless you are ill yourself and you don't want to spread your virus to other people, or if you're a healthcare worker, you wear a mask. Those two reasons, right? But it's funny how in a lot of places, right, people are kind of getting scared, right, and kind of saying, well, it's going to become the new norm that you have to wear a face mask, right? And Czech Republic, Slovakia, now Germany, and I think in New York State, I think in America as well, the governor there has kind of announced that it's compulsory, But the USA is a strange place, and I think that also ties in with the article that we're kind of looking at, which is pandemics and the ethics of risk. Risk tolerance is the right amount, because I don't know if you're aware that there have been all these protests in the United States to end the lockdown. Have you seen those protests, Ilya?
No, I haven't. I've heard of them, and I've heard a lot of negative reports about it, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure from just discussions, not actually seeing the articles. It seemed a lot of people misreading the information. The way I got from friends, this is second-hand information, was that Donald Trump is ignoring the virus. But when I actually talked to other guys, they seem to be that the public are pushing Trump to open up businesses and so forth.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. From your end, I haven't actually looked. So yet again, misinformation somehow.
Yeah. Or there's a lot of information. Perhaps there's too much information flowing around now, and it's all kind of revolving around coronavirus. It seems like nobody is talking about anything else except for coronavirus, and I think that's the other thing that elevates stress levels as well. Because it seems like we're saturated with news and opinions and ideas about coronavirus, except for yesterday evening with the tragic news of those 4 police officers. But then even when people report that, they kind of link it back to, oh, this is part of the kind of overarching tragedy that we're in at the moment. And I think the other thing is that when people say, oh, when will it end? And nobody can give a kind of definitive answer, right? And that's why then you have these people in the United States that kind of are protesting, and it's almost like the kind of lunatic fringe, the kind of preppers, etc. They're saying we have to rebel, and it's more like, but what are you rebelling against? You're rebelling against something that's supposed to be positive, because the whole notion of the lockdown is for the greater good. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Because saying that people can't go out of their homes, except for essential reasons, right, means that you're actually doing something that is not just for yourself, but for the whole of society. And then
Yep.
these people saying, well, no, because that's going to destroy the economy, etc. That kind of thing,
Yep.
and then that kind of leads to even more argument, because usually the protests are happening in Republican states, except
Yep.
for a few Democrat states. And then you have the Democrat governors in those states then complaining and saying, oh, it's the president, the Donald Trump, that's actually kind of inciting this because he's tweeting comments that kind of basically support the people that are protesting against the lockdown, right? By saying things like, America needs to open up soon, etc. America needs to be great again. But
Yep.
it's really it's like some kind of I don't know, like a science fiction soap opera almost what's happening in the United States, because um, every day when I look at news feeds, when it's kind of interesting, like what the recent thing is, Donald Trump kind of canceling what immigration to the US, etc., or green card immigration, etc. And he's saying for the reasons of coronavirus, etc. But his opponents are saying, no, this is just a backdoor way that he can actually, minimize immigration full stop to the United States, which is kind of always his agenda. That's what his opponents are saying, etc. So it's we live in interesting times. I think that's all I can say. If
For,
we go,
for
yeah,
myself, I really would like to step back and have a look at some of the leaders in on a global scale, like Trump and even our guy here, ScoMo, and so forth,
yeah,
and just to drill into their head and actually see what sort of what sort of platform they're working on. Are they actually on the Kantianism? Are they actually utilitarianism? Are they Machiavellian, or do you know what I mean? Like, we're
oh
in the
yeah,
middle
yeah,
bit
yeah, yeah, yeah.
of making the decisions about this. Like where our where we're actually heading with this virus. I think they're tearing heads apart, going between all the different types of virtues and so forth that you're discussing in the course.
Well, I think it's interesting you mentioned a Machiavellianism, right? Because some people
Yeah.
might say that then that is what Trump could be guilty of, being
Oh, I think
Machiavellian,
he is.
because
I
he's
think
introducing those, the immigration restrictions.
I think he's real hardball. Yeah. I think he is Machiavellian all the way through. Yeah.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. Whereas like ScoMo, for example, I mean, if you try to analyze ScoMo, the Scott Morrison, right? For those people
Yeah.
that don't know who ScoMo is, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, the Scott Morrison, right? If you scratch beneath the surface, he's just basically, a decent human being. He's
Yeah.
has a religious background, etc. And some people might use that against him, but
Yeah.
it's who he is, right? So I think that he's just trying to be, do the best he can, and based on his, ideals, right? And I think. That would mean that probably he's adopting a kind of, I don't know, virtue ethics, a utilitarianism perspective. Because I think with, even Daniel Andrews here in Victoria, the Victorian Premier, and Scott Morrison, I think they're both doing things to maximise the greater good for the greater number, right? So
Yeah.
in a sense, well, what they're kind of implementing is policies based on utilitarianism. So in other words, right, with utilitarianism, often you kind of, it hurts now, so we suffer, and
Yeah.
and we suffer as a group so that the whole, benefits in the future, whenever that may be, you know.
Yeah.
Even things like getting vaccinations, for example. If you get a flu shot, for
Yeah.
example, now, then a lot of people are kind of advocating, even though there's no vaccine yet for COVID-19, you should still get a regular flu shot, and I got
Yeah.
my flu shot,
Yeah.
last week. I don't know, Ilya, have you got your flu shot yet?
Well, I will be as soon as they take us out of a little bit more of this lockdown. I'm trying to avoid going to any medical centres.
So that's interesting as well because I think
Yeah,
when I went to the medical clinic, I noticed one thing: there was hardly anybody there, and they
yeah,
had, all these kind of social distancing markings, so people couldn't sit directly next to each other. Mind you, there was
yeah,
hardly anybody there except for me and somebody else, right? And also,
yeah,
you couldn't actually directly approach the reception counter. They had like, hazard tape all around the place, right?
yeah.
And I was kind of joking that it was good that I had long arms because I could kind of stretch that far to give up my credit card for the payment, etc. That kind of thing, It's like, what do I have to throw it at? And it's all like, oh yeah, it's like because people are kind of afraid to go to medical schools because they think it's like hospitals, it's the first place to go if you want to get well, a hospital, because
Yeah,
people that are sick, etc. Right? Yet the kind of paradoxical thing is like, you're right that other people are also kind of scared of going to medical clinics, and they may be scared for, the wrong reasons because maybe they're actually seriously ill for other reasons. Like they got a heart attack or something, right? They say, oh, I can't go to the medical clinic or the emergency ward at the hospital because I might
yeah.
get coronavirus, but you're suffering a heart attack. You might die from that.
I want the
You know
virus.
what I mean? So it's like
Yeah,
risks. I mean, that's the thing about, living in this environment that we're in now. We're constantly being warned about things. Like, if you go to a tram stop, right?
yeah,
If you're only going for essential reasons, as I say, which is
yeah,
supermarket, exercise, health, or work
yeah,
education, right? Tram
yeah,
stops, train stations, etc. They have on the public address system just people warning, about coronavirus. Like stand
yeah,
1.5 meters away from people. Don't,
yeah,
cough unless you cough. If you cough into a tissue, etc. I think on constant repeat.
yeah,
Wash your hands regularly, right? And it's more like people are running around looking for sinks, right? And toilets and stuff like that. And it's like, I mean, if you go into a washroom now, if you can find one that's open, because that's the problem. Everything is shut. So then people are constantly looking for washrooms, right? Or hand sanitizer, right? It's like some kind of weird science fiction movie, like people just have hand sanitizer hanging around their necks, etc. That kind of. And like people are now really paying attention to hygiene. So you see people in washrooms at the sink, right? And they're almost like, preparing for surgery. They're kind of,
yeah.
washing that long, which is impressive, I think. And I hope it kind of carries over, right? When all
Yeah,
this blows
I,
over.
I noticed the same thing in the supermarkets. So as you walk into the supermarket to get a trolley, you
Yeah,
walk past like 3 disinfectant bottles and
yeah.
these wipes, and then you have to stand in the queue waiting for someone to actually get these wipes, the sanitary wipes, and they
Ah,
basically disinfect the handle for like 3 minutes. Uh, uh, I and then you go to pick up your trolley, and your
yeah,
hands literally stick to the handle because it's been wiped so many times. And
yeah,
but the interesting thing I wanted to say was I going to the shopping centre a few days ago, I decided just to stay near my car for about 5-10 minutes. Right? And so I was just watching the people in the car parks, and I was watching people going in and going out, and very, very few would just walk in a straight line. The majority would actually pick their angle and see, oh, there are people there, and they would zigzag through the car park.
I do that. I do that as well.
Yeah, and
I
it was
think because,
interesting to see them doing it with a full trolley. So they're coming out with a full
oh,
trolley, and you'll get your person, or some people just, straight line, uh, they walk right past people. Other people would actually calculate their route. They would go left and right, zigzag between cars and so forth. It's just interesting way to see the social spacing. Right?
we should write a paper about that.
Yeah, but it was really interesting. It was different types of people, like people that just walk straight line. Yeah, okay, yeah, get my stuff, go to the car. And then the others were like the panic merchants. Oh, I'll go here and left and right. He's too
See,
close.
see, that reminds me. That reminds me of a comedy film that I saw once called The In-Laws. Have you seen The In-Laws with
No, no,
Peter
no.
Falk and
Yeah,
Alan Arkin? Right,
yeah,
and I think Alan Arkin's a mild-mannered dentist, and Peter Falk is some strange business person, and we find out he's really a spy involved in kind of shady deals, and they kind of meet up because their children are marrying each other and they're planning a wedding, right? But in the process, right, they're involved in some kind of gunfight battle, etc., right? And Alan
yeah.
Arkin, the dentist, of course, he knows nothing about this, right? Peter Falk, the spy, says, what you got to do is when you're running to avoid getting shot, move in a serpentine-like motion, so that Alan Arkin trying to run like a snake, in S kind of formation, right? And then later on, he's always saying, "Oh, serpentine, serpentine," and I think that always sticks in my mind is how I move now in coronavirus slang. I move in serpentine motion, to avoid people, right? Because people are the enemy. They're the plague.
Oh, actually, I'll hit you with another thing that happened a few days ago. Was
Yeah,
they introduced? I think it was on was it Monday? I think Monday on 3AW they introduced through the police commissioner. It's a new rule. New rule was that if you are in your car travelling to point of exercise, it is not considered going to exercise. So that was a new rule, right? And living out in the bush here,
yeah,
the only way my girls can do their basketball training is they use
yeah,
this application called Zoom, and
yeah.
the only way they can do that is to actually get to the local tennis courts, right, which no one frequents. And so now we were thinking, hang on, if you follow that rule to to the letter, we can't drive that 5.5 7 kilometres to the tennis courts because that's not considered exercise anymore. And so we thought, and I thought to myself afterwards, I said, now if you're in the shoes of a policeman, do you follow the rule to the letter? Are you a Kantianism guy, or right, do you have some flexibility in you? To look for, what are the consequences and so forth, right? So how does a policeman actually, what goes through their head before they give you a ticket, or do they not give you a ticket because of these new rules, right?
That's a good point. I think, and I think there were some police that were a bit too Kantian, right?
Yeah,
Following the letter of the
blindly
law,
followed.
and they got in trouble. Like I think it was that police officer that fined the woman who was teaching her daughter how to drive, I think, right?
Mm, mm,
And then I think eventually there was media outcry, and the fine had to be revoked. And the new edict was take a more utilitarianism approach, right, which is more
yeah,
like consequences of action. So, for example,
yeah, yeah,
if you are going to basketball practice and you have to
yeah,
drive a car, then maybe if you can describe that and articulate it, then that's enough, right? But if you just use it as an excuse, if you kind of have I don't know, a car full of hoons, for example, right? And they've got like, booze up the wazoo all over the place. And then they're pulled over and they're saying, well, we were only going to basketball practice.
yeah. Now, so you
That's,
look at it from our point of view. What sort of concept, what sort of framework are we following if we just ignore the rule and just jump in the car and go straight to the tennis court?
well, I mean, the thing is like, maybe it's what is in your heart. Are you going to
Yeah,
tennis practice or basketball practice in your car because you absolutely need to go to tennis or basketball practice, or are you doing it just because you're bored or you're frustrated with lockdown, etc. And this is one way you can get out. You know what I mean? So it's more like if
yeah,
you had to go in your car to the supermarket, yes, that's valid. Or for a medical appointment or
yeah,
whatever, that kind of thing. If it's job related, etc. But
yeah,
sometimes like people would make up excuses, for example. But then again, maybe you might even make up excuses if you're going to see your GP. Like, do you have to actually see your GP, right? Or are you
yeah,
just going to your GP because you want to get out of the house, for
yeah,
example, right? and I think the way they've kind of tightened that up is look at dentistry, for example, right? Where I
Yep.
think dentistry's been kind of controlled, and it's more like you can't go and see your dentist just because you want your teeth cleaned or stuff, or cosmetic dentistry. You can
Yep.
only go to your dentist if it's like for an emergency, and it's if you've cracked a tooth, etc., that kind of thing. And there was a dentist on the radio the other day, and somebody asked him, "Do you still get people nowadays, right, that come to you because they've cracked their teeth because they've been playing some sport or something like that, right,
Yeah.
or whatever?" He says, "No, that hasn't happened at all because people don't practice that in lockdown that much, so they don't kind of take those kind of risks. So if they do have an emergency, it would be like for more valid reasons. They have an abscess or something like that, or decaying tooth that's gone too far, and it starts to hurt, and then needs treatment, etc., that kind of thing." And the other thing, right, that I need to mention is hairdressing salons and barbers, for example, right? So
Yeah.
in my area here, there was a barber, and it was closed for a long time, but I think a couple of days ago it opened up again, right? And the thing is, like, then now they've kind of really introduced that kind of social distancing kind of thing, etc., and tightened up, how you kind of go to this barber, because before it was more like you can go there without an appointment, right, and just wait in a
Yeah.
chair, right? And
Yeah.
and now they've introduced appointments, to regulate the number of people going there, right? And also they used to say, "Oh, we have 7 barbers, right, working there every day," and they don't have 7 barbers working there; they have less, to minimise the number of people there. But it was interesting. When they were actually shut, they had this kind of screen, putting up posters saying, "We'll be back soon," and they had pictures of the Three Stooges, etc. This is how you can actually take care of your own hair while you're waiting, and then or let it grow. And they had a picture of Chewbacca, the Wookiee, let it grow out. So,
Chewy.
and then wait for the day when you can come in again and get a number 2 and a number 1.
Yeah.
But um, but anyway, we go back to that article, right? Which is oh, sorry, just trying to flip through it. Yeah, pandemics and the ethics of risk. Just skip down to with the perspective of sometimes since the origin of the outbreak in terms of coronavirus, we can see that many decision makers, if they were following any risk standards, were following prudent vigilance, and I think the writer of this article is actually classifying different ways in which people approach risk. So there were decision makers regarding coronavirus following prudent vigilance or the gambler's principle when they should have been following the precautionary principle or the prevention principle. And then he's got detailed explanations of what they are. So essentially, what the article is talking about is these 4 ways of approaching risk, which is prudent vigilance, the gambler's principle, the precautionary principle, and the prevention principle. And the prudent principle is it is permissible to take risks, but with continuous analysis, re-evaluation, and correction when prudent. And remember, back in week 3, I think, right? Or was it, week 3, we looked at Aristotle and his list of virtues. And I think if you look in the list of virtues, right, prudence is a virtue. So prudent is a term meaning being careful, I think. So, and correction when prudent, when risks become clear and direct. But with regard to the risk of pandemics, it might counsel that we should have some pandemic responses prepared, but not too much until it looks like a real threat is directly on its way. So prudent vigilance is more like, okay, there's this thing called coronavirus. It might be a bad thing, but we won't worry about it too much. It becomes a real threat. So, Ilya, would you say? I mean, remember early on, you used to call coronavirus the coconut virus.
The coconut virus.
Do you still call it the coconut virus?
Yes, I still do. And in my other courses, the students have actually caught on. Now I've got like 1,100 students emailing me and says, "Oh, how are you doing with the coconut virus?"
You know something? This is what I'm going to put up as an open challenge to any of the students listening just now, or any of the students who listen to this recorded version is I dare you to create a coconut virus, a meme.
Meme.
So you can go to meme generator, etc. Right? Find some pictures of, a bunch of coconuts, right? And have a caption that says, "Oh my God, lovely bunch of coconut viruses." And stick it in your individual learning journal, right? I dare you to, right? But the thing is,
Yeah,
your attitude, Ilya, when you were saying coconut virus, right, and you still are referring it to as coconut virus,
yeah.
is it because that's a way that you're coping with the
Yes,
virus or the
because
situation,
exactly,
right?
exactly.
And
So
it's
I,
not like you
yeah.
deny that it exists. You know that
No,
it
it's
exists.
exactly. It's
Yeah.
exactly right. Because
Ah,
when it hit, and we were just as a bit of background, why I called it the coconut virus is when it hit and everything, all the institutes around Melbourne, you saw Swinburne closed down,
yeah,
or
yeah,
Latrobe, everyone was closing down. RMIT was still going. And we were still going to classes, and the
yeah.
students in the classes are face to face. You could see that some of them, actually a large portion of them, were all concerned and worried and so forth. Like basically in a panic almost, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and I couldn't handle it. I thought, why would something has to happen to get these kids out of mindset. So I made a joke out of it.
Okay.
And now I actually see that it had an impact, because some of the
Yeah.
students actually, they realise, yes, it is dangerous, the risk is there, right, and so forth. But life goes on. So yeah, make a bit of a joke out of it, and I think it sort of goes back to Australian humour as well. I think Australian humour or culture is the same as well. Something happens, and they'll make a joke out of it.
So it's like, she'll be right, mate. She'll be
Yeah, yeah.
right, mate.
Oh,
She'll be right,
I just cut my artery like this. Look, it's
she'll
spurting,
be
and
right,
someone will
mate.
make a joke out of it. Yeah,
Yeah. It's like, oh no, we're in a
yeah,
nuclear attack and we're being bombed by H bombs. She'll be right, mate.
yeah. Let's go to Barbie. Yeah.
Wait a minute, but isn't that also the virtue of resilience? I
No,
mean,
no.
would you say that the Australian character is a resilient character?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I agree with it.
Oh, okay. So, but I think probably maybe I'm just trying to theorize on the fly that humor or the appropriate use of humor actually builds resilience.
Well, there's actually a pity I don't have the articles. There are studies of like World War I, World War II. Uh, here it's saying the high-ranking like officers and so forth, and
Yeah.
were actually making jokes, jokes about things
Yeah.
during the war, when the fighters were in the trenches just about to die and so forth.
Yeah.
And it was actually a psychological play on things.
Okay.
Actually. Pity I don't have the articles, just to show you. But
I think they call it gallows humor, don't they? Gallows humor. Like
yeah,
if you're,
not sure, not
say,
sure. Yeah, yeah,
in any kind of critical occupation,
yeah,
nursing, medicine, etc.,
yeah,
police forces, and you see a lot of really bad stuff. So in a sense, I think a lot of people in these occupations would be naturally stoic. So if you look at, say, the police force, once again, right? I mean,
yeah,
police would follow duty. They know what they have to do, right? But
yeah,
they also see a lot of bad stuff. So that makes them kind of become stoic. But I think to deal with being so stoic, then they have to offset it by, developing a sense of humor, dry
yeah,
sense of humor,
yeah,
etc.
yeah.
And maybe we should be offering, hey, I just had another idea for a meme, a coronavirus clown. Like for example, if you go, I don't know how many of our students out there have ever been to a rodeo, rodeo,
Yeah, never.
a rodeo, right? In the United States of America, or in Calgary,
Okay.
Canada, for example. Right? But rodeos, people will get on the back of a cow or a horse, for example, and it's
Yeah,
kind of like wild, bucking, close to racing. But the thing is, what they have to start to actually corral these animals, right? And
yeah,
get them back into their pens is they have what they call rodeo clowns. So
yeah,
some select as the job of dressing up in a clown costume and trying to distract a wild bull or a horse back into their pen. you know. And maybe, and the thing is, if I've
Can't be
heard
beat.
of clowns being used in hospitals, for example, at the Royal Children's Hospital here in Melbourne. They have, I think, a group of medicos. They call themselves clown doctors. Oh yeah, and there was a Robin Williams film, I think, about the medical doctor in the US that started this program, right? And it was basically a doctor in a pediatrics ward, and lots of children very sick, sad, etc. Right? And to boost their spirits, he would kind of dress up in a clown suit and kind of start telling jokes and do what clowns do, etc. That kind of thing. So maybe we need coronavirus clowns.
Yeah, and it just got posted on the comics. Carby B, yes, he's a clown.
So, so maybe if our students, apart from trying to find a bunch of coconuts, right, and turning it into a coconut meme, right,
She's crazy.
if you can find a picture of a clown, let's have more coronavirus clowns. Right? But you do know that there are some people that actually have unnatural, morbid fear of clowns. There's a special word given to it,
Yeah.
So maybe it's genetic. I hope I haven't actually scared people out there that may have a phobia of clowns. What's the second one? The second.
Hang on, before you do that. Here, look.
Sorry.
That was the one. That was the one that Jed just popped up to coronavirus.
Cardi B's reaction to the coronavirus to give back a bit. Oh, okay.
Anyway, yeah.
Give back in a big way. Okay.
Yeah.
See, because everybody's trying to do something in lockdown, to boost people's spirits. Like some people are, doing live music gigs and whatever. And there's even comedians, doing comedy, I think, on Amazon, for example, because, the comedy festival is kind of nixed, And I think, and we don't, we need to have that kind of outlet now, I think.
Yeah.
So maybe we need to do something online about clowns. I think that's
But while you're going through these, the principles and prudence and so forth, I was thinking that which scenario were we following by driving to the tennis courts?
Oh, okay.
Anyway,
what's the next one? The gambler's principle, characterized by the phrase, don't bet more than you can afford to lose, which also implies that you can bet what you often think you can afford to lose. And what exactly that entails is a judgment call made by those in power, often, but not solely political leadership, with respect to pandemics that might attend to more smaller diseases such as influenza, while only preparing to deal with ones that have truly catastrophic risk potential, such as bioweapons, which means that some people gamble, say, okay, we'll take risks because something like influenza, if you do get it, it's not that serious, right? So we can maybe engage in more risky behavior. But, now that we know that coronavirus is probably twice as infectious as the common cold, and the common cold is really infectious, then you have to be more afraid of it because it is so infectious, But I think in the case of you driving to the basketball court, right? Isn't there also, isn't there like two-pronged risks? There's a risk of you being in the car and having an accident while in the car, and also the risk factor of you, getting infected, etc.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, I think that anyone that drives in a car is engaging in really risky behavior. Because I remember reading, kind of the how-to manual of road regulations, which they give to people when they get a learner's permit, right? And one of the things in there stuck in my mind is more like, if you want to avoid problems on the road, don't drive so much.
Yeah, don't go to car. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? And so. And the thing is, I was reading an article on road safety, and they interviewed the trauma surgeon specializes in injuries due to car accidents, and he said that his job actually colored his attitude when he drives a car. So when he drives a car, in his mind, he's always thinking everybody else on the road is trying to kill me. That's his attitude, literally, right? Which I think has to be a 150%, stressful, you know, worldview. I think, if you kind of think everybody's trying to think that's a kind of paranoid attitude, right? But I think that's because the only thing he sees are the kind of bad consequences of driving a car, right? Because every day he would kind of deal with, the trauma of driving, and people would normally say, what are people's fears? And people are usually irrational about fear. So people would fear, I don't know, flying. Like a lot of people would be afraid of going up in a plane. Right? And then people would point out that the probability of dying in an airplane crash is much, 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 much less than just going into any kind of motor vehicle, for example. Right? But people kind of don't kind of think about that, right? And the thing is, right? I like to think that when you actually drive a car, it's such a kind of ritualistic process because it's a ritualistic process. Learning to drive the car, it's a rite of passage, So you've kind of grown up when you get your driver's license, right? And then when you get your car and your license, right? And you're off your P plates and whatever, that kind of thing, then there's that kind of sense of freedom. It's, yours truly in the road, the smell of the open road. I am in control of this vehicle, for example, right? And it goes back to, once again, another thing in week 3, Jean-Paul Sartre, existentialism, that, there's that curse of freedom. The curse of freedom is basically, oh, I'd like to be free, But wait a minute, when you are completely free, then you're responsible for everything that you do, So that's the case with you driving a car, for example. I guess that nobody is ever completely free when they're driving a car because there are road regulations and you have to deal with how other people actually deal with the driving of their vehicle, for example, So there's a kind of illusion of freedom, But at least you have the freedom of, not depending on things like public transport or other people to drive you around, Because I know people myself that have a kind of irrational fear of public transport, I mean, they won't go on a train, because, they don't like traveling where they're not in control.
Did you see the? Go.
No, you talk. Oh, for coconut virus. Oh, you found it.
Yeah, Hitesh put it up from the chat.
Did somebody do that just now?
Yeah.
That's cool. That's HD. Sorry.
It's brilliant. Well,
See, that's what I'd like to have in this course in the future. We get like instant HD, right? It's only like 5 seconds, You've got 5 seconds to do this task. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you can do it.
And I was trying to upload, but this site's so slow.
What I
was hoping to do is go back on your conversation about the driving. And my question the question I posed was, what's better, aggressive or defensive driving?
Okay.
And I couldn't find it here.
Aggressive driving.
Let's see, what is the difference?
Well, I mean, the thing about aggression, right, is it? Well, I mean, okay, is aggression an emotion or is it a vice? Is aggression a good or a bad thing?
Belligerent, I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. Synonyms: pushy, hostile, forceful. They sound like bad things, right? But I think all of those things, being pushy, being hostile, belligerent, etc., they all sound like emotions rather than kind of being a virtue or a vice. Because I would think that in the kind of traditional, notion that Aristotle kind of posited, a virtue would be this behavior that you kind of maybe invent and you master, and then other people, try to adopt that virtue, right? So I don't think it's something like an emotion, because I think emotion aren't actually invented. I think we have them, as a species, and maybe the kind of controversy would be, is it something that is, is there an ethnicity to emotions, for example, or are they kind of pan-cultural, for example, like being Slovakian of heritage, for example, or Bulgarian, for example, on the father's side.
Yep.
I mean, are there emotional traits in the Bulgarian character that, aren't present in, say, the Australian character, for example? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's a complex character. Because remember, before, you just said, Australian humour, for example. You said Australian humour. You didn't say Bulgarian humour.
Well, have you ever heard the line saying, hot-blooded European?
Ah, hot-blooded European.
Well,
Okay.
that describes Bulgarian down to a T.
Passion. That's it. Passion. Yes. Which makes me think of week 4, when I was talking about codes of conduct, and I think I brought up the original one-page RMIT code of conduct, and one of the values is said that academics staff should have is passion. So we should be hot-blooded. Too bad we can't play music clips here. Otherwise we have that song, hot-blooded, 103.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Well, the thing is, right, I think I can understand that hot-blooded thing. It's almost like, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Remember the top pyramid pointy thing, right? The self-actualization kind of thing. Be the best that you can possibly be. So I think that thing of, hot-blooded European is not kind of, well, you're just kind of a crazy, lose your temper, etc. It means that you do everything with a passion, like with a kind of, like even if you kind of eat scrambled eggs in the morning, for example, you try and kind of have passion when you're eating scrambled eggs. For example. I'm just saying scrambled eggs because I kind of missed them. The eggs are in short supply still. I mean, the thing is, I went to the supermarket the other day, right? There's lots of toilet paper, and there's toilet paper on top of toilet paper. It's like some kind of, weird science fiction movie, the invasion of the toilet roll, for example, right? But then when you go to the place where the eggs are, no eggs. Sorry, no eggs, etc.
Because we were buying them to colour them for Easter.
Oh, it's your fault then. You've actually stolen
dozens of eggs, all coloured Easter eggs.
I know. Yeah, I was constantly searching for eggs, and I'm thinking like I'm in a, like an episode. What's that TV series MASH? Where they always have like they're making fun of the food that people had to eat during the Korean War, and the eggs that they only ate powdered eggs apparently. So I feel that that's what I've been eating lately, just powdered eggs. Oh, there's eggs. Oh,
yeah, well, our place was basically like this for the last week.
So in other words, just a lot of coloured eggs and hardware paraphernalia, routers and eggs.
Yeah.
Is that how you pronounce it, router? Sorry, I always pronounce it the other way, but I kind of sounds like
some people always say router.
Oh, okay. So I just wanted you to say that.
That's what router.
Router.
Yeah.
Oh, what was the other thing? So it's prudent vigilance and the gambler's principle. So prudent vigilance is you're kind of careful, right? But you're not like super, paranoid, right? And gambler's principle is, like, you can bet, because maybe you might lose, but hopefully you'll lose small and not big, for example. And then the precautionary principle from that article that we're kind of focused on this week is when facing an unknown, take the most cautious route to prevent whatever the worst outcome might be. Regarding pandemics, it would be highly prepared for numerous types of unknown pathogens to appear and would have many and varied responses ready at all times. So in other words, since we're dealing with something that's totally unknown, right, then maybe the precautionary principle might be the right approach to take, which is, really be careful. And I think if you look at, we were talking before about Scott Morrison, or as you affectionately call him, ScoMo, right? Versus the Victorian leader, Daniel Andrews. So I'm wondering, why does Daniel Andrews have a contraction in his name, like Danos or something? But Daniel Andrews, right? They kind of, some people kind of, Dano. So Daniel Andrews was kind of criticised, but later he was praised because he really went full on with the stage 3 lockdown. Because if you remember, the recent history was more like, some things were kind of, most things were kind of open, and then they kind of closed down gradually, and now we're in stage three, right? And I think, and it's almost like, well, uh, if you look at what happened in, say, New Zealand or in the United Kingdom, for example, it seems that their lockdowns were more severe than here, because but if you look at what happened when Daniel Andrews introduced stage three lockdown, it was more like those four reasons for why the only reasons why people should leave their homes, right? Go out to shop for food and essentials. But the thing was, the ambiguous thing was, what were the essentials, for example? But it seems like naturally some retail outlets just decided to close because there were less people on the street. So Myers closed, but David Jones is still open. So David Jones, I think, is taking a risk because, in a sense, that they were engaged in a kind of war. Because if you look at Burke Street, David Jones and Meyer are kind of opposite each other in the street, right? And it's almost like they had a staring war, for this lockdown kind of thing. And Meyer blinked and they closed. And David Jones is saying, "Yay, we're open." But if you walk down Burke Street now, it's really spooky, because it's like those sci-fi films where you just see tumbleweeds and maybe the odd zombie, for example, right? And that's Burke Street now, tumbleweeds and zombies, right? And the police officers, looking for people to find, etc. That kind of thing, right? And like the David Jones, since they're open, right, and there's so few people, they actually seem to have more security guards in the store than customers, right? And the rationale, I think, right, is because there's so few people on the street. David Jones is afraid because it's a big store, right, that some people might just run in if they didn't have security guards and take stuff and run out. So that means it's like they have security guards at all the entrance and exits, right? So that it's almost like you have to show your identity papers when you go into David Jones to look for a pair of underwear or something like that. But but it's really strange, right? But it's more like, I think that the kind of severe approach that Daniel Andrews, in retrospect, was maybe a better way of doing things. And I think now the thing is, people are saying, okay, now that we have infection rates so low, for example, why don't we relax lockdown restrictions and open some things up? But the chief medical officer is saying, whoa, wait a minute. If you look at some countries, right? I think it was Singapore where that happened, where they had like a low infection rate because of lockdown. Then they released some restrictions, and voila, we had a second wave infection, right? So now they're talking about,
if you have a look, I've put the stats up, right?
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, if you have a look, see, Australia's still having, in the cases, in the buses.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
I didn't realize Mexico was so high.
Yeah. So this is a good reason to to keep it going.
Yeah. And the thing is, I think, like you mentioned Stoicism a few times in this session, right? And I think even though it's kind of uncomfortable, I think the crazy thing is maybe a lot of people might actually learn to love this lockdown thing. I don't know. I mean, I don't, because you mentioned you don't have to travel for 4 hours a day.
Yeah.
For example, but other people might just find it comfortable to have this kind of really rigid routine, because I think a lot of Diamond Princess.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why it's allocated as as its own little country. They've vanished in a black hole.
That ship is going to have like a really bad reputation. Pretty soon you'll be able to afford to buy it, will you? Because I know you have a large sack of money somewhere, or just kind of.
I can guarantee you there'll be some guy out there already thinking of a business to attract people, saying this is where it all started.
Oh yes, you mean like a museum, like a kind of coronavirus tourism, for example. Yeah.
I was still surprised that we're still on the chart, and like on a daily basis, we're still in there.
Yeah.
I would have thought with the way we're going, I would have thought we'd start getting to zeros. No activity.
Well,
it's just surprising that it's still going.
Kind of good to see that, we're kind of this low.
Yeah.
But it's interesting the fact that, people are just hanging out every day for, the toll, like how many people were infected today? I mean, pretty soon people start betting on it. I mean, if the TAB offices are shut, but maybe we should start. Oh, no, we shouldn't. Online betting is wrong. For example, I was thinking of betting on infection.
But going back to the stats, have you
Yeah.
noticed with the thing that really gets me is this sort of thing?
Or Diamond Princess.
No, like China's only like a tenth of what the US have got.
Oh, see that's the interesting thing that's always surprised me.
Really
Is well, why is the US in such a bad state, right? Because look,
count. Yeah,
United States of America, they're the tech leader, business, arts, culture, etc., all that kind of stuff, right? Yet, they're in this situation. It's kind of totally paradoxical, I mean, like,
Yeah, the numbers it's phenomenal.
Yeah. It's kind of sad because I like American culture. I mean, and it seems like all this is really going to hurt all of that, I mean, so John is sad, I think.
I'll pose a question to you. Is it because they have tested so many?
Yeah, I think so. And once again, is that what kind of risk would that be? Precautionary principle? Yeah, I think probably precautionary principle. When faced with the unknown, take the most cautious route to whatever the worst outcome may be, which would be test, for example, right? And I know from personal experience, in the past, I would go to this GP, right? And the GP would, every time I would go, he said, do a test, do a blood test, do this kind of test, right?
Yep.
And he would think, oh, it's free, Medicare will cover it. And then all of a sudden I tell him, this test costs $500. And, oh, no, I didn't know that. Sorry, you know what I mean? You go to other GPs and it's more like, say, R, for example, right?
Yeah.
And then they hit your stomach and that's it, right? You know what I mean? Whereas the other guy would be, take a stool sample, blood test. Why do you need a stool sample, right? I've got a runny nose.
Going back to the test.
Yeah.
When I was in Singapore, when the virus stuff just started up, in Singapore, every time I would walk into the hotel, I would get tested with a thermometer. Every time. Yeah.
What kind of a thermometer, Ilya? Sorry, I wasn't.
Sorry, it wasn't one of those.
It's not like all of a sudden they drop some coins down on the floor.
No. It was one of those. Is it infrared or whatever? It's
those are fascinating thermometers. I remember being, it was a GP recently, right? And it's more like the GP is kind of paranoid as well. It's more like, take your temperature, for example, right? And he whips up some like things that looks like a handgun or something, right? Or a nail gun, for example, right? And he's got it like, I don't know, 30 centimeters away from my forehead, and he takes my temperature. That's cool, right? I mean, like, doesn't have to touch anything, right? I mean, like, I think we should all have those kind of things.
Yeah. But they literally would test you. There's a precautionary principle there, which is through the roof.
Yeah. I mean, so if we go back to teaching face to face, as people are saying, right, go back full on, other things are still down. Should we then, also take continuously? That could be
temperature of every student going into the class.
No. But if we do it like a example, so instead of shaking hands, each other's temperature.
It might be the new method of greeting each other.
Well, but I think the thing is maybe the university couldn't afford to give us all individual infrared or ultrasonic thermometers. But if there was some kind of app, could we do that with our Android iPhones? I'm wondering, can you take your temperature with your iPhone?
Yeah, it doesn't have
something.
Oh, yeah, it does. Does it have a temperature?
Does it? Does your Samsung Galaxy, whatever doohickey, have a thing for taking temperatures? Maybe look in the Google Play, not the iStore, the the place where you get apps, for example.
We got 15 best thermometer apps.
Oh, they do. Shit.
They do.
Oh, sorry. I mean, I didn't say shit, but it's, well, I'm just explaining how that'll be edited out. You know what you should do when you're actually cutting this, right? Is bleep out just some random words, right? So that people, when they listen to it, they say, "What? Why is John swearing?"
Last recording, I actually put airplane noises in.
I like that. Yeah. What was the okay, so you got prudent vigilance, the gambler's principle, precautionary principle, and the prevention principle. So the prevention principle is when a threat is understood, it should be prepared for exactly as it is. Regarding pandemics, this would anticipate the constant natural production of pathogens and, like the precautionary principle, prepare many and varied responses. So I like the many and varied responses. It's more like, well, you don't just have one way of doing things, you have a range of doing things, right? And I think that links to a concept in IT known as agility, I think. Right? If you're agile, right, it means that you're nimble. You're nimble in how you do things. So you're not kind of like weighed down by inertia, etc. So you can dance around and take this route or that route and so forth, right? And often I think people get stuck and bogged down when they just kind of try and repeat things. Oh, it didn't work. Let's try it again. Even though if you do it again, it still won't work. For example, right? And that's the essence of agility, I think, is that you kind of don't just, um, remain in a stubborn pattern and kind of do the same thing over and over again. But the prevention principle is interesting because I think that's usually at the core of modern health or the philosophy of well-being is, prevention is better than cure. So if we can really understand something, if we know what a threat is, inside and out, then we can warn people, don't do this, don't do that, and have kind of ways of mitigating it if people do actually have it, etc. And obviously, of the four ways of dealing with the risk, precautionary principle and prevention principle would be how we should be dealing with coronavirus. Maybe prevention principle wouldn't be that applicable to COVID-19 now because we don't really know that much about it. There's still a lot that is, ambiguous or unknown about COVID-19. Even things like, constantly, I read articles like, is COVID-19 really an airborne virus? And then people, if you dig beneath the surface, what do you mean by airborne? And people would say, well, is it distributed by droplets or by aerosol? What exactly is an aerosol? Can you define an aerosol, for example? So, when experts kind of quibble about things like that, then we're still in unknown territory. But then when the media reports, oh, here's one paper that talks about this, then everybody reads that article and thinks, that's true for all cases, when it's not. I think that's why we're doing what we're doing now, academia per se, right? So students do courses, academics teach courses, etc., so that people can understand a range of things about a particular discipline. So the worst thing I think is if people think there's only one way of doing something. I mean, there's only one way to learn something. There's one way to teach something. I think people should be generalists, I think, rather than specialists. I mean,
Well,
even if you're...
to add to your point is
Yeah.
the race for a vaccine.
Oh, yeah.
Like America was off the bat trying to look for a vaccine. Australia was.
Yeah.
I know Canada was, and UK, and the race is still on, but it looks like the leader won't be between America and China. It looks like Oxford University.
Oh, Oxford University. Oh, next week. Oh, cool.
And they're going to start next week. And it really goes back to your point. I think it was last week you mentioned that the universities around UK, they've just sort of like bloomed and went, right, this is our elementaries.
Yeah.
And they've really hit the path running, and it looks like they're actually going to come up with something which is quite good.
Well, I mean, this week I got an email from reporting some organization, I think it's called AXA, right? And they've got a bunch of research grants for academics to
Yep.
try and study certain aspects of this coronavirus crisis, right? And it's not
Yep.
necessarily, come up with a vaccine or something, but it's things like, how do people deal with, isolation and social distancing? I think I actually sent it to Bianca. I don't know if she's actually read it,
Yep.
but I made a suggestion, right? That could be like a PhD topic, like
Yep.
how do people kind of deal with e-learning and social distancing and isolation, for example,
Yep.
because the thing is, like e-learning, we've been talking about this for ages, right? And I think when people were talking about e-learning, it was basically just a kind of underhanded way of kind of trying to get rid of us, teachers, academics. If we have e-learning, then we don't need to have as many teachers, that kind of thing.
Yep.
But it's more like e-learning's been forced upon us now because of
Yep.
the situation that we're in. But
Yep.
it's not like the kind of nice e-learning, where we're kind of comfortable and we can still go to the beach or art galleries, right? We're kind of in prison and we're e-learning. So I think the closest analogy would be the body of research where people have looked at how people undertake study in prison. So
Yep.
if you go to prisons around the world, there are people, even like life imprisonment, for example, right? And they're doing
Yep.
university degrees. Right? I think there was a guy
Yep.
here in Melbourne, right?
Yep.
He did a PhD. He did his whole PhD,
Yep.
during life imprisonment, I think, and published papers, etc., that kind of thing, uh, which is probably really difficult to do. But the point is now we're kind of all in a kind of similar situation.
Forced to
We're
do
not
it.
necessarily in a jail cell, but we're kind
Yep.
of, there's only limited things that we can do. So our freedom's been restricted, right? And maybe this thing that we're doing now, online learning, online teaching, we shouldn't actually view this as being a chore. Maybe we should view this as being a kind of privilege. Because
Yep.
it's like I said before, right?
Yep.
To ordinary citizens that aren't doing degrees, etc., right? That aren't going to high school, primary school, for example, right? They're sad because public libraries are closed. But
Yep.
but we have a library, you know, we students, etc., right, can
Yep.
access ebooks, videos, etc. Mind you,
Yep.
with problems with internet connectivity, but we have this ability to do that, so we should be happy for that. I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
I pose a question to
Yep.
you. um, how, so if we take, let's say, Oxford University and they've a vaccine, a trial for
Yeah.
vaccine,
Yeah.
how can we be precautionary for or create a vaccine for something which is unknown?
Ah.
And now,
Okay. So.
further question, right? If I go
Yeah.
back to here,
Yeah.
they're intending to take tests and hoping to be successful, right?
Yeah.
How do we know? Why aren't they precautionary about this as well? Reason is, what if this vaccine, mutates into something else and starts killing off people, or has some kind of side effect which we don't see at the moment? So
Well.
these principles are quite interesting for just that vaccine trial.
I mean, the only danger I think of that happening would be if you have some kind of renegade researcher that maybe decides to, I don't know, test it on himself or
Yep,
herself, right? So
yep,
it's more like, okay, I've tested on a rabbit and a rat, and they're okay, right? But if I want to test it on a human being, then I have to go through these ethics committees. And that's the thing, when people do research, right, they have to actually ensure that their research is actually passed, through the relevant ethics committee. You had to do that earlier for your PhD.
I
Had you,
know.
yeah, yeah, which is kind of
But I
like
was thinking more in terms of how do you create a cure for something that doesn't exist?
oh, wait a minute, but I thought, you do believe that coronavirus exists, right? It's
Yeah,
more like,
I do, but But before all this mayhem all hit
Yeah.
the set, Oxford University and so forth wouldn't have had an idea of what this virus is really. Like, did it actually exist? I don't even know, to tell you the truth.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I think it mutated from SARS, right? Because SARS was what the bird flu, I think, from a few years ago. So I think and the fact is, this is COVID-19. So I presume there were 18 other COVIDs before this, right? So somebody
So,
might ask,
yeah. So, how do you get a vaccine for COVID-20?
and that's the thing. Maybe all that's happened now in the world is a lesson for humanity,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
we should actually respect the fact that there are organisms that
yeah,
are kind of more powerful than we are as
yeah,
a species. We might think it's that hubris kind of thing. We're humans and we can do whatever we like, right? Because we have a big brain and stuff like that. But here we have a virus, and a virus isn't technically alive until it's, attached
yeah,
to a host, right? That's actually causing this mayhem, right? So, in other words, since this is COVID-19, there's been 18 before it, right?
yeah,
Why haven't there been kind of dedicated research projects to try and, come up with vaccines for all of them if there haven't been vaccines for all of them, so that then it's easier to find a vaccine for the one now or vaccines for the future. You know what I mean? So it's more like automating the process. It's like software engineering. Let's talk about software engineering for a minute, right? So in other words, right, in the 1960s, when I taught a course, I think it was systems implementation, right? I kind of referred to as software engineering for business students, right?
yeah,
And not for computer scientists, right? And the point that I wanted to make was that the history is important, even for people learning software engineering. So the history of software engineering is in the 1960s, right? There was this problem called software crisis. So if you Google software crisis articles in Scientific American,
yeah,
right, saying that software projects are coming in, over budget, over time, etc., lots of flaws, and this was a chronic occurrence. Why is this happening? So there was a meeting of people at Garmisch, I think in Germany, right? NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. I think they're still around. Is NATO still an entity?
yes, yes,
Yes. So,
yeah,
so NATO had this meeting, right? And why was it important, right? Because there was this thing called the Cold War. So remember in the 1960s, early 1960s, it's like post-Cuban Missile Crisis, I think, and people were still
yeah,
worried
yeah,
about, a different kind of apocalypse. Not apocalypse because of a virus, but apocalypse because of nuclear war, thermonuclear war, right?
yeah,
And everything, even then, was controlled by computers, kind of crude computers for the time, right? So if we had this software crisis, right, then, maybe it could initiate a premature, exchange of weapons, which is a bad thing, So the
yeah,
NATO bigwig said, let's have a meeting, let's do something, and voila, we have this thing called software engineering. And the whole purpose of software engineering, it wasn't really engineering, So if you actually studied its origins, right, it was almost like a marketing campaign, Can we
yeah,
come up with a framework to try and establish a sense of trust of large software systems? And I think it's the uncertainty of large software systems or the ambiguity of them, And now, software systems are super, 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 super large and complex, for example. So there's kind of no chance that there's one person that would know, everything about the Android operating system, that controls your, Galaxy device, for example, right?
yeah,
Because there's teams of people that create this, right? And I think that kind of, process of creating super large systems, right? Harks back to those days when people were afraid of the uncertainty of developing larger systems in the 60s, right? Which led to the software crisis, which led to software engineering, So I think that we need the same kind of approach, I think the same kind of philosophy with respect to how we deal with viruses, I think, or any kind of, microorganism, because it's not just, viruses that can do nasty things to us, but, hospital, have problem with infections, because,
yeah,
antibiotics, right, are foolproof, right, and people develop, you know, or microorganisms develop immunities to antibiotics, right? And that, you know, is another way that, you know, which can lead to disasters, etc., which, you know, is another story. You know? So I think we need a kind of, you know, virus engineering. That's it. I call it virus engineering. So it's not like software engineering, but it's virus engineering or viral engineering. You know,
Yeah.
and I think my notion of viral engineering would be it's not just about you know, creating the next vaccine, but it's understanding all aspects of it. So maybe if we have a discipline or something called viral engineering, then we'll have viral engineers, and we need to have university courses for viral engineers, right? Etc. I don't know. I'm just kind of brainstorming. You know. Any
Can a
thoughts? Oh,
virus,
yeah.
can a virus jump the electronic divide?
Well, no, but no. See, it's interesting. Computer viruses, for example, they've been around for a long time, and that metaphor of a virus, you know, in terms of computer systems, it's interesting as well.
Yeah,
Because if you look at, say, where a computer virus is more prevalent, and it would be like in Intel Windows type systems, I guess, probably,
yeah.
and they're probably less prevalent in, you know, Apple operating systems, Apple devices. Am I correct, or am I blowing smoke rings,
I,
etc.?
I think I think I think the Apple community were uh, falsely sort of shown a picture saying we don't have any viruses. It was about
Ah,
what 15 years ago.
yeah.
Um, but the hacker community actually saw that as a great opportunity and used to pump out, you know, dozens of Apple viruses and Trojans and so forth, because
Oh,
even the Linux community they have viruses as well. But it was always pushed saying viruses only exist on Windows platforms.
oh, because I always thought that the reason why there were more viruses on Windows platform was almost like a political statement, you know,
Yeah,
because in
it was
the
a
early
hatred
days,
of cats.
it's a
Yeah,
hatred, you know, like the
hatred
evil
of cats.
empire.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes. So you know, Bill Gates and Windows were kind of a monopoly and so forth, right?
yeah.
But
But
in the landscape now, it's different, I think. You know?
yeah, but a hacker doesn't really care. He'll hide behind those sort of scenarios, right? So hide behind the curtain and attack the vulnerable, so to speak.
But isn't it true also that hackers per se, right, like to show off because they say, look how good I am. I can create this. I have technical prowess, right? And the
Yeah,
way,
hence the three hats for hackers: the white hacker, the black
oh,
hacker, and grey
yeah,
hacker.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. You were saying?
No, because I'm thinking like the way people sell Apple devices now. It's almost like, well, they're so easy to use, right? Like ease of use is more like any idiot can use it. Apologies for Apple users, right? But it's like, I take it out of the box, right? You don't have to do anything, right? It almost works by itself, for example. You don't have to type, right? Because it knows what you're going to type, etc. That kind of thing, right? Whereas
Yeah,
like with any Windows device, you have to have like 3 engineering degrees and a PhD in order
yeah,
to do anything, for example, right? And that's kind of like the revenge kind of thing. It's more like I hate this, right? Or the thing is, oh, that's the other thing, right? With maybe the reason, right, there's less viruses in Apple land, right, is because of that walled garden philosophy of Steve Jobs. Remember, you know, like we were
yeah,
always joking about this, you know, like iTunes, for example. I used to joke with my students, right? If Apple under Steve Jobs ever came up with a driverless car, right, you'd have to actually start it up through iTunes, you know.
yeah.
And I think in a sense that control, because even like you know, that's why people do people still jailbreak Apple
Yeah,
devices?
yep.
Yeah,
Yeah. I've done the same for my mobiles.
but you're an Android person, aren't you?
Yes, even they are blocked or locked to a particular provider, so you have to
Oh,
break.
okay. The thing about jailbreaking in Apple, right, that I thought was interesting always was if you wanted to buy stuff through the iStore or get apps through the iStore, they were
Yeah,
very kind of rigid in what was allowed to be on that platform, you know. So it was almost like censorship, you know. So there'd be like a kind of dark web of Apple apps, for example, right? And then people would jailbreak their devices so they could get these kind of, dark Apple apps, for example, right? Whatever they
Yeah.
do, etc. That kind of thing. But that's another story. And we should spend another session talking about the idiosyncrasies of the late Steve Jobs. Um, but the thing about Steve, right? He was idiosyncratic and eccentric, and maybe that's why he did what he did. Because it's another theory that I have. You can only be or do great things if you are willing to be a little bit eccentric in how you actually do them, etc. That kind of thing.
I couldn't find I was trying to find while you're talking that case for allowing us to repair our own devices and so on.
Oh yes, I sent you that, didn't I? Yeah, I sent you an article because it's actually a group or a movement. I think
Yeah.
it's like a social movement of people that want to get the major producers of hardware and software to come up with systems where they can be repaired and they're not just designed for almost like single use only. But I think it's that kind of culture of obsolescence. It's more like,
Yeah.
if you buy a device, like even like a iPad Pro, for example, right, or an iPhone, right, then every, it's like a weird kind of Moore's law. Every 18 months, you have to throw your old device away and buy a new one. But the problem is there's no kind of radical novelty, I think, at this stage. Between phones or between tablets, for example, they seem kind of the same. So people can only make improvements on, say, the camera or things like that, but there's nothing kind of brand new. I mean, I'd like to see kind of radical novelties where there's something brand new. Well, I didn't see that in the last version. That's fantastic. I don't even, oh, wait a minute. There is actually something like that. The new iPad Pro, and I think I've talked to you about that recently. The iPad Pro has what they call a LiDAR camera in it. So it's a camera, you take a shot of something, and it tells you the distance from that object. So the LiDAR cameras, they're used in driverless cars and other devices, and they're part of what's called augmented reality. So if you want to develop augmented reality software,
Yeah.
you need to have a LiDAR camera. So I think that's interesting, but it's more like with that kind of addition to a device, you need to really have that hacker mindset to play around, experiment, etc., and come up with new systems that you can develop. But I think that's what Apple wants to do with that new LiDAR camera on their iPad Pro. But I digress radically. Stand up for your right to repair.
Yes.
Yes.
And in America, the movement's actually really boomed. So they're
Holy
starting
cow.
and I think it's because Trump as well has come up and said, why can't people do their own thing? Right? So he seems to be supporting it. And so
Okay.
there are only a few more states to go. And then if it actually hits there, it may actually go global.
Okay. So do you think that would be a good thing for Australia?
Why can't we? Why are we locked down even for servicing of our own cars?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I think it's just politics again, trying to protect mechanics' jobs and so forth.
Yeah. I agree.
The rate are good and so forth. Poor old Ilya there, really thinking of himself.
For the greater good. Just trying to skim through the rest of this article. I think we covered those principles, right?
Yeah.
Let's get back to the end of this article, right? So which risk standard is most ethical in regard to the current pandemic? The mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, sons, daughters, spouses, and friends of the thousands who have perished would likely say that the gambler's principle, and perhaps also prudent vigilance, has proven to be an approach with devastating results. If we value preserving human life, the precautionary and prevention principles would seem to be the most ethical standards to help shape future preparedness. I kind of agree, because I always like to tell students each semester that I think that one of the secrets to success in life, in part, is attention to detail. which is not to be confused with, being a perfectionist, which is almost like obsessive compulsive sometimes. But attention to detail, I think, is maybe there's a word that kind of describes that, so it's on that virtue list from Aristotle probably. But I think that it's something that's embodied in many walks of life. If you're and I'm trying to be politically correct here, if you're a crafts person, so it doesn't sound right. Normally I would say craftsman, but I'm excluding people, right? If you're a crafts person, right? The kind of, I think the definition of a crafts person is a person that has attention to detail, because you can't be a sloppy crafts person because it doesn't make sense. Craft by its nature is something that demands attention to detail. And attention to detail doesn't have to be attention to complexity, but it's attention to detail even in minute things. I think one of the virtues that probably comes to mind is awareness. Do you have awareness? Are you aware of things? And you probably say, "Oh yes, I'm conscious because I'm still alive." But I think true awareness, right, is you can sense its detail at a kind of high and a low level as well, right? And I think that's embodied in the precautionary and prevention principles that are the essence of this article. And I noticed another thing: nobody's made a comment to this article. I mean, I'm going through all these articles, right, in the McCullough Center for Applied Ethics, and zero comments, right? Okay, it's another thing. I dare students, right? I double dare students. I triple dare students, right? You've got nothing else to do, right? You can say, "Oh, what am I going to do today in lockdown?" Right? Go to the supermarket and look for hand sanitizer. No, I dare you to make a comment on a McCullough Center for Applied Ethics article. And they might be really happy. It's more like back in Santa Clara University, they said, "Look, somebody in Australia has made a comment. We've got one comment. My life is complete. My life is complete."
Did you notice in the article as well the precautionary principle?
Yeah.
Yeah, they mentioned it there as well. So to be precautionary, proactive, to actually be proactive.
Proactive, yeah.
So it kind of misses in that, like in the list here. Why not actually list the proactive principle as well?
Proactive principle. So you think it's different? Proaction.
They've actually mentioned it a little bit, saying,
they've recognized it.
Risk, but they didn't put it in the list.
Oh, yes. Okay, digression. Again, in software engineering, there's a thing called the capability maturity model. I think it came from Carnegie. You've heard of it, Ilya. So I'm
I had to implement it several times. We got to see them in level 3 and 4.
Okay. Tell me about the capability maturity.
Level 5.
Okay, what's level 5 in capability maturity model?
Level 5 mainly says the system should be, basically contains itself, and the improvement is in the feedback within the system. So we don't have to get involved to try and improve the system. The system is there, takes care of the improvements within the system itself.
So it's proactionary by nature.
Yes.
So
your documentation, your processes should all filter out and actually provide the answer of improvement to the system on its own.
Okay. And stage 1?
We don't have to stick in TQM meetings, which is total quality management meeting, and draw up fishbone diagrams trying to find improvements in systems. The system takes care of itself.
What is a fishbone diagram? Can you bring a fishbone diagram up?
Fishbone diagram, I can't remember the official Japanese word. It was an Ishikawa diagram or something.
Ishikawa? Okay. The students, you don't realize that Ilya is actually what was a high-flying executive who worked at a major Japanese corporation, but he's not Japanese himself. Remember, he's Slovakian, Bulgarian. So, did you learn any Japanese when you were there, Ilya?
Yes, super Russian.
What's that?
I always use that all the time, and it actually says excellent.
Okay, excellent. Shibarashi. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
is there a HD? Or like, what's a HD? Like high distinction?
So
Sorry.
here's Ishikawa diagram.
Oh, there it is. Fishbone. That's it. Oh, okay.
Fishbone diagram. And
Wow.
the fishbone diagram, basically says what are the affecting factors to achieve this outcome.
You know something earlier. Why didn't you do this for your PhD thesis? Right?
No,
I mean, the thing.
no.
Why? Because you want to get you have nightmares about.
And I think I've nearly achieved my ultimate goal for the PhD, and that was to, from the professional life, knowing how professional people think, live, breathe. I wanted to do the PhD to understand how an academic thinks, lives, and breathes. And I think I've almost stumbled on the answer. I shall post the answer afterwards. I think I know.
Is there a chicken bone diagram? Sorry, I'm just. See, the problem with fish bones.
About CMM models.
Aren't fish bones really nasty? I mean, fish bones, they get stuck in throat and all other weird places, right? For example, I think that, having that as an adjective for a diagram is not a good thing. I think I'd rather have chicken bones or something, or some other skeletal structure, that kind of stuff. It's a bit icky, I think. But the thing is, going back to the capability maturity model, so the highest level, number 5, right, you mentioned, is, I think, the proactionary principle is actually embodied in that. So it's almost like you have a system that anticipates possibilities, right? But what's at the bottom? Number 1 in the capability maturity model is, of course, ad hoc. Everything is totally ad hoc. You do things by the seat of your pants. Am I correct?
Yes.
But
Yes.
I've got
the.
Oh, there it is. Yeah. Okay.
Leveled up. So it's uncontrolled, and like you said, ad hoc, uncontrolled, and events just happen, and people just react.
So if we look at the capability maturity model almost as a model for ethics, imagine there is a capability maturity model for ethics, right?
Yeah.
So level 1 would be you take an ad hoc approach to morality. So is ad hoc the same as random, or is it more like agile?
Well, it's undocumented. That's the problem.
Undocumented. Okay. Undocumented. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So probably if we're applying this to ethics, for example, say, like a level 1 in the capability maturity model for ethics would be like an undocumented approach to ethics that you can't actually learn from. Because if it's undocumented, you then can't kind of go back and kind of analyze what you did and kind of share that with other people. Whereas like if you're at level 5, like a proactionary approach to ethics, then it is kind of like a structure that kind of takes care of itself. People know how it works. People can, learn from it, etc. That kind of stuff, I guess, probably.
So
I'm just trying to. Yeah.
Level 5 really gives you the process improvement objects. So the objects feed back from the system. Oh, okay, we've got so many defects, and the objects would actually feed back and say our error rate is at such a level. This is what you have to do to improve, to bring it back to an acceptable level. So it's repeatable, defined, managed, and then it actually has the feedback loops to repair itself on the way. So it's really like a I don't know how you'd actually explain it.
See, I miss this. I miss the capability maturity model. I mean, I remember teaching this when I was doing that, software engineering for business students, or I was going to say software engineering for dummies, but that's another book. But I thought the capability maturity model was kind of simple and elegant as a structure, right? And obvious, but still profound. You know what I mean? It's almost like the capability maturity model is a kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Correct.
Right?
There it is.
And I think, I'm not sure, but I think somebody actually made that comparison in class one day when I was teaching. Maybe I'm confused or something, because that is kind of profound. But once again, I mean, this is something that could be applied in other areas of life as well. I mean, that you don't just have capability maturity models of software systems, but you could have, as I said, capability maturity models of ethics, for example, or or risk or all kinds of things, you know. So I'm still thinking that, oh, ISO. So there's an ISO standard for what?
So I was just going to explain. Actually, I won't find it, but I was just going to explain something from my history in in management. Uh,
Yeah,
we lived on ISO models, and so in other words, to get to these maturity levels, like 3, 4s and so forth,
yeah.
we had to basically upskill all our staff. So effectively, everyone became a project manager, so to speak, right?
Oh,
Yeah, and
yeah.
to be able to do the managed and defined areas, you couldn't have staff which sat there and just did computer programming, right? Or
Everyone,
just
everyone,
bugs.
every. Oh, see,
So we were pushing most of our stuff anyway. My stuff anyway. When you get to a certain level, I would actually push you through project management courses up to project management like level 3s, 4s, and then probably a level 5, which will include okay. And anyway, so we were moving towards ISO accreditations, and I was trying to push the same ISO accreditations on my staff that I was teaching in America as well. Right? Japan, the staff in Japan just blindly followed it. Said yes, good idea, and they followed the ISO because we initiated, or basically I initiated here in Australia. So I went to Japan. Japan took it on board quite well, but America refused the ISO international. I really couldn't understand why, and they just kept harping on CMM, and they would just live on CMM. I don't know. I could not introduce them to ISO standards. They were just
well,
not interested in anything international.
I mean, what does ISO stand for? International Standards
International open
Organization.
standard. Yeah,
Based
yeah,
in
yeah,
Switzerland, I think. Yeah, or Geneva, yeah, Geneva, Switzerland, I think.
yeah.
And I think it's. I mean, the analogy would here be religion, for example, or Christianity, for example, right? There's a religion called Roman Catholicism, right? Which actually is centralized in the Vatican. So the Pope is kind of the notional head of all Catholics, right? But if you look at the history of Christianity or Catholicism, right, there was kind of a split, at the Reformation, where there were a bunch of Christian groups that left Catholicism for various reasons, and even the kind of major split, the Orthodox Church, Constantinople versus Rome, etc. Um, it's more like some people objected to a central authority for a religious group in one area on this planet. So it was the fact that you had the Pope calling the shots, right? And I think maybe that's true with America's attitude to ISO, right? They don't want to have a neutral location somewhere that's not in America actually calling the shots for everyone, because the Americans would say, we came up with something called a capability maturity model, right? And we think it's great.
Yeah.
Make America great again, that kind of thing.
But
But
I'd be interested to see what the changes were, because I haven't kept in touch with it. But I'd be interested to see what the 9000, 2000. Oh, sorry, I typed in 9000, 2000. We were looking at like what has ISO actually, what have they actually achieved in the last few years?
I mean, ISO is
Yeah,
interesting because ISO has standards for everything. I mean, there's standards for programming languages and blockchain, and even another course that I teach, user experience. So there's an ISO standard for user experience, right? And I have to laugh at that because user experience is a very vague term, extremely vague term, right? But ISO tries to have a standard for it, right? So it's more
yeah,
like trying to standardize vagueness, right? This kind of paradox. I'm sure that ISO is trying to standardize ethics. Is there an ISO standard for stoicism or ISO standard for utilitarianism? But maybe that's the
yeah,
exercise, right? I leave that for students. That's their homework, right? I want you to actually draft an ISO standard, for utilitarianism, right? And And people might think, well, that's kind of crazy and weird, right? But I tell you something weirder, right? I dare you to design an emoji. You know what emojis are, right? I dare you to design an emoji for stoicism or utilitarianism or any of the ethical frameworks that we covered. Because if you want to actually design an emoji, right, you have to actually go through hoops, almost like ISO standards. You know, and there's a documentary that I saw about emojis at the film festival last year, right? And people have to actually, no joke, you know, like a 20 or 30-page document just for one emoji. You know, so you know when they have that like the doggy poo emoji.
Yeah, yeah,
You see that, right? You know,
yeah.
literally, that was actually passed through a committee meeting. So somebody has to have a 30-page document for doggy poo. You know, and people get knocked back because well, we have two people and they're slightly different, you know, excrement, for example, that kind of thing.
In that meeting.
Yeah, so it's like a patent document, right? I'm sure they have like emoji attorneys now, for example, that handle these things. It's quite complex, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but one last thing before we close shop, because I think that we may be going a little bit over time. Before you mentioned in your description of the capability maturity model that when you were working at your big multinational company, right, uh, in order to get from one level to the next, you kind of trained your staff members so everybody was a project manager. I have a term for you. Look up holacracy. It's HOHOL. It's holacracy. Maybe I'll try and find it.
Holacracy or time?
It's HOLOT. HOHOLO. Chrissy. CRACCY. That one, yeah. Oh, that's it, yeah. Look up the Wikipedia article.
Oh,
So, it's the wrong one.
we'll go back.
The Wikipedia, yeah, probably is better. Yeah, so a method of decentralized management and organizational governance in which authority and decision making are distributed through a holacracy of self-organizing teams rather than being vested in management hierarchy. So this came from Silicon Valley. So I think it's some person that was like an agile, extreme programming nut, right? And he came up with this kind of management philosophy. And it's what you said. So in other words, if your organization adopts holacracy, it means there's no roles. So there's nobody that's like a assistant programmer or project manager. Everybody is just doing stuff.
Yep.
And the rationale is the problem in most organizations is there's jealousy or envy or politics between titles in a hierarchy. If you have everyone doing things, right, and then the only thing they have different is what they do. So for example, if you had holacracy in a hospital, nobody would have titles. So this person's a neurosurgeon, this person's a nurse. It would be, oh, everybody's the same, but this person happens to be cutting open somebody's brain, and this person is emptying bedpans. You know, and you don't refer to them. This is a nurse or this is a neurosurgeon. They're just hospital workers. Yeah, and I think the philosophy is basically that makes working in such an organization better. And I think Zappos, it was a firm in America that kind of adopted holacracy as a platform. So it made me think when you say everybody is a project manager, because if everybody is one thing, then nobody is anything really. You know what I mean? Because if everybody is a project manager, it's like saying we're all humans. We're all humans, but I don't refer to you as a human, and you don't refer to me as a human because we know that we're both humans. See?
You're so right, actually, because when I was working in Monash University and then left that place, I couldn't stand it. I couldn't understand the culture in there was incredible. You go to lunch, and you know this guy called Fred, right?
Yeah.
Fred would actually be called Dr. Fred at lunch. and this other guy, Professor David, and so, like, why? That is David.
yeah. But
And it was continual. Every time I was there, you could go to lunch with them, and they would still say, "Oh yeah, Dr. Fred, Professor. You don't need to say that's David, right?"
That's the tick on their shoulder. It reminds me, I think it was that Austin Powers movie, #1 and #2, right? And I think Dr. Evil is, holding the world to ransom, and somebody, the President of the United States or somebody in the UN refers to him as Mr. Evil, and he blows his stack and he says, "You know how long it took me to get that PhD?" There's one on about that. Call me Dr. Evil. Well,
yeah.
I think Mike Myers just kind of being inspired by a similar example to what you had, because some people just kind of, you know what I mean?
It really is frustrating. It really was. It's frustrating.
Yeah.
I really
that should be our homework for students. I want students, if they can find it anywhere, watch any of the Austin Powers movies. Right?
You're wrapping up. You're wrapping up.
I'm wrapping up because I think it's almost 1:30 and we've been here for too long. Yeah? But I'll leave students with one last question to think about, right, which I think this week's live tweet task involves watching Blade Runner, right? So I think a Blade Runner, a riddle about Blade Runner. So most people would be familiar with gig economy workers. People on bicycles and motorcycles delivering Uber Eats food or Menulog, for example, right? So my riddle is, why are some gig economy workers like the replicants in Blade Runner? And I guess first you have to actually watch Blade Runner to kind of understand what replicants are. And we could spend a whole afternoon and more just talking about Blade Runner, couldn't we, Ilya?
The Blade Runner old version, current version.
I see. Now, so you should have done a PhD in Blade Runner. Okay. The Blade Runner, which I have the link to the students, right, is actually the final cut, the director's cut, which is the one that doesn't have the voiceover narration, etc., that kind of thing. Right? But still, why are some gig economy workers like the replicants in Blade Runner? And I don't know, how many of our students you think are gig economy workers? Or how many of the academics are gig economy workers? That's what I have to say, because it's sessional work, right?
Yep.
Riding a bicycle, delivering a pizza, I guess.
Good question.
So, do you have any other final words, Ilya?
No, I would like to thank everybody again. It was a good talk.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for participating, Ilya, and thank you, online audience. We hope that you got something from it, and this will be up as soon as Ilya's
Thanks, guys.
ISP regenerates, etc.
Yeah.
Thank you for
All the best, guys.
Bye bye.
Yeah.